Salam, peace be upon you. Episode 13, The Silent Ground. Part 23, The Fog That Is Not a World. There is one primitive, the holophase, the continuous cyclic order that makes reality readable. And I will say the firewall out loud, exactly as promised. If you hear me smuggling space, time, energy, matter, or dynamics as primitives here, treat it as an error. The bridge from responsibility to necessity. In part 22, we discovered something that sounded like ethics but was really architecture. We learned that comparability demands responsibility. If you make claims that others will live inside, you must allow those claims to be compared. You must allow checking. You must allow correction. Because in a readable universe, refusing comparison doesn't just hide truth, it breaks shared navigation. Now, in part 23, we take one more step down to bedrock. We ask a question so simple it feels almost childish. And yet, it is the question that decides whether reality even means anything. What would the world be like if nothing could be distinguished from anything else? What would the reality be like if you could not tell it apart from non-reality? Because if you can't tell a thing from not that thing, what exactly are you calling a thing? The core insight. A reality you cannot distinguish from anything, even from non-reality, isn't a reality at all. Let me say that again in even simpler words. If nothing can be told apart, then nothing can be known, nothing can be named, and nothing can be lived inside. Without phi, there is no world. Not no world as a dramatic sentence. No world as a strict consequence. Because phi is the permission for distinction. And distinction is the minimum requirement for any there to be there. The white noise symphony. Let's slow down and make this feel real. Imagine sound, not music, sound. A perfect white noise. Every frequency, every pitch, every possible tone, all playing at once at exactly the same volume. No rise, no fall, no pattern. Just a constant, uniform hiss, from eternity to eternity. Now ask, is that music? You might say it contains all sounds. Yes, but blended into sameness. You cannot pick out a tune. You cannot find a beat. You cannot distinguish a beginning from an ending. It is sound without distinction. And without distinction, it is not music. Music requires difference. A note that is not the note before. A silence that is not sound. A pattern that stands out from the background. White noise has none of that. It is the acoustic equivalent of fog so thick you cannot see your hand. It is not richness, it is featurelessness. And here is the key. If someone said, I have the ultimate symphony, it is perfect white noise, you would know they were confused. Not because the sound doesn't exist, but because calling it music destroys the meaning of the word. Music is organized sound. White noise is the absence of organization. Phi is what allows organization. Without phi, reality is white noise. Not a rich, complex world, but an indistinguishable hum. A hum you cannot even hear as hum, because to hear it as something would already be to distinguish it from silence. The fog that eats the world. Now let's move from sound to sight. A fog day. Not a light fog, not a romantic mist. A fog so thick It erases distance. You step outside, and within 3 steps, the world disappears. No horizon, no landmarks, no shapes, no edges, no sky, no ground. The air has swallowed the difference between far and near, and your mind starts doing something strange. It reaches for anchors. It tries to create objects out of almost nothing. A vague shadow becomes a person. A vague line becomes a wall. A faint change in brightness becomes a doorway. You are watching your own mind, begging for distinction. Because without distinction, you cannot navigate. Without distinction, you cannot even tell if you are safe. Fog doesn't destroy the world. It destroys the readability of the world. And when readability collapses, world collapses for you, even if the atoms and buildings are still there. That's important, because it shows you something we often forget. A world is not merely stuff. A world is stuff that can be distinguished. A world is structure that can be read. And readability is not an extra layer painted on top. Readability is the minimum condition for a world to function as a world for any observer. That minimum condition is phi. I will return to the place beneath hell where I spent my entire childhood. The dim rug factory where I wove from age 7. From dawn until dusk, 6 days a week, under the bludgeonings of supervisors and the owner who stood above them all. We began in the half-light of early morning, when our fingers moved by memory more than sight. We worked through the day as the light shifted across the concrete floor, and we finished only when the light had gone completely. It was not just dim, it was absolute darkness. The kind where opening your eyes and closing them made no difference. Where you could wave your hand before your face and feel the air move, but see nothing. In that darkness, work stopped. Not because a supervisor allowed it, not because we were tired, though we were, but because distinction became impossible. I would reach for a bundle of wool. Was it the coarse wool for the border, or the fine wool for the flower petals? In the light, my hands knew the difference by touch, the thickness, the twist. In darkness, my fingers fumbled. Both felt like vague fiber. The difference still existed in the wool, but to me, it did not exist. Without light, I could not access the distinction. I would try to find my tools, my hook, my comb, my shears. My hands would sweep the wooden bench, knocking things to the floor. Everything became just hard object. I could not tell my finger from the thread until I cut myself on the blade. That was how I saw in the dark, through pain. Pain was a brutal, late distinction. And then I understood the deepest lesson. In that darkness, the factory ceased to be a factory. It became a void, filled with objects I could not name. The looms were no longer looms. They were bulky shadows. The patterns were no longer patterns. They were textures remembered, but not seen. The work itself vanished, because work requires you to tell one action from another, one knot from the next. The factory, as a system of meaning, depended on distinguishability. Without light, without contrast, without the ability to tell wool from cotton, border from field, progress from mistake, the whole structure collapsed into undifferentiated noise. That is what a world without phi is. It is not a blank slate. It is a functional collapse. It is a universe that cannot be read and therefore cannot be inhabited. That factory was also the place where I eventually became one with weaving. But in the darkness, even that oneness dissolved into unreadable night. The lesson was written not in philosophy, but in the failure of my hands to find what they needed. When distinction vanished, the world vanished with it. And only then were we allowed to stop. The map of nowhere. Let's take an example we all understand. A map. A good map shows differences. Mountains here, rivers there, roads connecting towns. You can locate yourself because the map distinguishes one place from another. Now imagine a different map. It is perfectly uniform. Every square inch says the same thing: land. No borders, no features, no labels. Just one color, one word, everywhere. Could you use it? Could you navigate with it? Could you even call it a map? No. It does not help you tell where you are. It does not help you plan a route. It does not represent a navigable world. It is a piece of paper with a single repeated fact. A map requires differentiation. Without differentiation, it is not a map of somewhere. It is a picture of nowhere. Now think, what is reality but the territory the map represents? If the territory had no differences, no here versus there, no this versus that, could it be a territory at all? Or would it just be uniformity? A uniform territory is not a rich, infinite expanse. It is a conceptual void. You cannot be in it, because being in implies location, and location requires difference from other locations. Phi is what allows the map to be drawn. It is what allows the territory to have features. Without phi, there is no map because there is nothing to map. The trap in denial. Now we must be careful, because someone might try to escape by saying, fine, maybe humans need distinction, but reality itself does not. But that sentence hides a trap. The moment you say reality itself, you have already used distinction. You have distinguished reality itself from human experience. You have already used this, not that. So the attempt to talk about a reality beyond distinction uses distinction to do it. That's the heart of part 23. Any coherent account of reality will secretly use comparability somewhere, even if it claims not to. You can't even deny phi without borrowing phi, because denial requires distinguishing the claim you deny from the claim you accept. Even silence requires distinction. Silence is distinct from sound. Even emptiness requires distinction. Empty is distinct from full. Even nothing requires distinction. Nothing is distinct from something. So we're not making an empire out of a word. We're revealing the unavoidable condition beneath every word. The child's first world. Let's come closer to home, to the beginning of a human mind. A newborn's world is not yet organized. Sights, sounds, touches, smells all flood in as sensation soup. But slowly distinctions form. Light against dark. Mother's voice against background noise. Hunger against fullness. The feeling of wet versus dry. Each distinction is a world-building act. Before distinction, there is only sensation soup. After distinction, there is this and that. There is comfort and discomfort. There is presence and absence. Now imagine a child who never forms distinctions. Light and dark are the same. Mother's voice and wind are the same. Hunger and fullness are the same. Such a child would not learn, would not seek, would not avoid. They would not have a world. They would have continuous, undifferentiated experience. And that experience would be, for all practical purposes, nothing. We know this from rare medical conditions. There are disorders where the brain cannot compare sensory inputs, where touch feels the same everywhere, where sound has no variation. Those who suffer them describe not a rich unity, but a horrible monotony, a sameness that swallows meaning. They do not say, I am one with everything. They say, I am trapped in fog. Phi is not an abstract philosopher's idea. It is the birth of experience. Without it, there is no here, no now, no me, no you. There is only the white noise of existence. Now, let's connect this to the holophase stance, carefully, with the firewall in mind. We are not allowed to say space-time gives distinctions. We are not allowed to say matter gives distinctions. We are not allowed to say energy gives distinctions, because in holophase, those are not primitives. Those are readouts that come later, once phi becomes publicly readable as change. Here, in the permission layer, we are earning what must be true before any of that can ever arise. And what must be true is this. There must be some primitive capacity for this, not that. And that capacity cannot depend on space or time, because space and time are themselves forms of this, not that. Space is here, not there. Time is now, not then. Motion is this change, not that change. So they all presuppose the permission we are describing. That permission is phi. Part 23 is the boundary line. It says, if you try to build any world from something other than phi, you will always smuggle phi back in, because you will need distinction to even talk about your starting point. The universe without difference. Let's go big. Cosmology. The Big Bang Theory says the universe began in an extremely hot, dense state. But even that state had differences. Tiny variations in density, in temperature. Minute distinctions that later grew into galaxies, stars, planets. Now imagine a different beginning, a singularity that was perfectly uniform. No variations at all. No fluctuations, no differences, no asymmetries. What would happen? Nothing. Because without difference, there is no cause for change. Without fluctuation, there is no structure formation. Without asymmetry, there is no direction. The universe would remain uniform. It would expand, perhaps, but into sameness. No stars, no planets, no light, no life. Just spreading homogeneity. Could we call that a universe? In a technical sense, yes. It is a collection of energy and space. But in any meaningful sense, no. It would be a cosmos without cosmos, an order without order. Because order requires arrangement, and arrangement requires difference between parts. So even the birth of a physical universe requires phi. It requires the possibility of distinction from the very first moment. Otherwise, nothing ever happens. The prediction. Now we make a sharp, testable claim. This is the heart of the holophase method. We do not just describe, we predict. Here is the prediction. Any coherent account of reality, no matter how poetic, no matter how abstract, will contain, somewhere, a distinction structure. It will contain, somewhere, a this and not this. It will contain, somewhere, a comparability rule, even if it tries to hide it, even if it denies it, even if it says all is one. Because to say all is one is already to distinguish one from many, and all from not all. So the prediction is not that everyone will use the symbol phi. The prediction is that every workable worldview will secretly rely on phi-like comparability. And we can test that prediction in a practical way. Take any theory. Ask one question. What would be different if your theory were false? If the theory cannot answer at all, if it refuses all possible distinctions, then it is not a description of reality. It is a shield against comparison. It is unfalsifiable fog. It cannot participate in the public layer. So the prediction is, under long pressure, any non-comparable worldview will either collapse into meaninglessness or it will quietly reintroduce distinctions in practice. Because life forces distinction. Navigation forces distinction. Survival forces distinction. So even if someone claims to live in a world without distinction, their actual behavior will reveal distinctions. Avoid fire, seek water, choose safety, reject poison, prefer shelter. Life is distinction in motion. So the prediction is strong. Non-distinction philosophies cannot be lived consistently. They will either become silent or become contradictory or become violent. Because once you remove shared distinction, you remove shared correction, and force takes the place of truth. That's not drama. That's structure. We must say clearly how this could be wrong. We are not making a fuzzy, poetic claim. We are making a structural one. Here is the falsification condition. Present a complete, consistent description of reality that does not use distinction, difference, or comparison anywhere in its foundations. Not just in its words, but in its structure. Not just as a slogan, but as a working system. It must be 1. Complete. It accounts for all phenomena, or at least claims to. 2. Consistent. It does not contradict itself. 3. Descriptive. It says something about what exists or how things are. 4. Free. It does not rely on comparability, even implicitly. What would that look like? It could not use language, because language distinguishes symbols. It could not use logic, because logic distinguishes truth values. It could not use examples, because examples distinguish cases. It could not even be presented as a description, because that distinguishes it from non-description. It would have to be a theory that is indistinguishable from no theory, a map that is the same as blank paper, a statement that is the same as silence. If someone offers that, we must accept it. But we predict they cannot, because the moment they offer it, they have distinguished it from other offerings. The moment they defend it, they have distinguished it from falsehood. The moment they say, this is how things are, they have distinguished how things are from how things are not. Phi is the watermark on all thought. You cannot escape it without ceasing to think. The ethical consequence. This connects back to part 22 with terrible clarity. There we said, if you make a claim, you must make it comparable. Now we see why at the deepest level. Because if you refuse comparability, you're not just being stubborn, you are moving toward unreality. A claim that cannot be checked is a claim that cannot be distinguished from nonsense. It floats in a fog of its own making. It does not connect to shared ground. It does not build a world. So the ethical imperative is not just about fairness. It is about sanity, about keeping our shared reality readable. about preventing the fog from swallowing the village. When someone says you must believe without evidence, they are asking you to enter the fog, to accept a world without distinction, to treat white noise as music, to treat sameness as truth. That is not spirituality. It is cognitive dissolution. Fog made of words is not innocent, because if you speak fog into the shared space, people may navigate inside it. They may take risks. They may submit. They may obey. They may sacrifice. So, part 23 is the ethical consequence of part 22 sharpened into ontology. It says, if you refuse distinctions, you refuse responsibility, because you refuse the possibility of correction. Scope and clarity. Let's be precise about what this part does not claim. Part 23 does not claim only what humans can distinguish is real. That would be arrogant and foolish. Part 23 claims only what is distinguishable in principle can count as a world for any knower. In principle means it could be distinguished by some licensed comparison, by some possible observation, by some possible difference-making test. It does not have to be distinguishable by your eyes, or by a ruler, or by a machine today. But it must be distinguishable somehow, in some coherent sense. Otherwise, the claim it exists adds nothing. So part 23 is not human-centered. It is readability-centered. And readability is broader than humans. Any knower, any system that can make distinctions requires phi, because phi is the permission for distinction itself. The listener carry. I want to give you one sentence to carry out of this part, a sentence that is small enough to keep. Here it is. Any knowable reality must be distinguishable. Hold that. If someone offers you a reality and it cannot be distinguished from non-reality, then it is not a reality you can live inside. It is not a world. It is a word cloud. That's the hook. That's the compass. The bridge forward. We have reached a boundary. We have seen that phi is necessary, that without it, nothing coherent can exist. But now a new question arises. If phi is so fundamental, if it is the ground of all reality, then what is it like? Is it one? Is it many? Is it everywhere the same? Or are there different phis for different worlds? That is where we go next, to the uniqueness of phi, to the claim that in any coherent reality, there is only one comparability structure, not many, one. But that is for part 24. For now, sit with this. The world you know, the room, the sky, the people, the thoughts, all depend on a simple silent permission, the permission to tell this from that. Without that permission, the world vanishes into fog, and you vanish with it. We have earned the necessity. Now we will ask, what does it take for phi to become a public world? What does it take for distinctions to become stable enough to be shared, checked, and remembered? The silent ground is ready. The first distinction is waiting. Always peace be upon you.